and bring some questions to Yaniya, and hopefully we can also open it up afterwards and have a discussion and also hear about your thoughts. So first of all, many thanks, Yaniya, for this opportunity to learn more about your rich work and engage with it further. I should start this short engagement by acknowledging that while I have realized research into Eastern European history, the 20th century Baltic history, as well as history of several minority communities in these contexts, my knowledge about the Tatar people before we started our conversations was nearly inexistent. So in Estonia there is a small Tatar community of about 2,000 people. But as far as I'm aware, there are no artists or filmmakers with that background who could bring attention to their homeland and to the struggles related to it. And Yaniya mentions in her contribution to the catalogue that the Tatars also do not easily fit into the existing discourses of the Arab world or the global north. So it seems that the most of the existing categories make it very difficult to consider the history of the Tatar people in its own right. And acknowledging this also requires that we acknowledge the operations of Russian imperialism and its suppression and the occupation of many, many smaller nations and cultural communities that Russia continues to dominate or occupy to date. For a very long time, Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine has brought this further into public consciousness, but rethinking and rewriting these histories where they are largely missing will be a very slow process and take a long time. And this is precisely where Yaniya's artistic research carries a seminal role, as works of art combined with her epistemic position present very important sources of knowledge about the culture, tradition, memory, and struggles within the Tatar community, as well as affects around them. And what is particularly sympathetic in the uncertain times in which we live in is also that she couples it with an activist position and has the courage to reimagine a different future, as well as a different past, compared to the way it has been written in Russian language history books. So I will raise a few questions and points from my own epistemic position of being a post-Soviet subject myself and a curator researcher. And something I'd like to start with, which goes a little bit beyond these notions that you brought to the fore in your presentation, but please feel free to connect it with them, is the idea of witnessing. Because the narrative of Sisterless makes Albina's thoughts present with a sense of urgency, while turning the viewer into a witness. So there are these series of intimate conversations between you and the protagonist in the train, while taking a walk, while visiting her mother, while searching for the grave of her sister after her suicide, while visiting her apartment to review her belongings, making a fire in the beach, as you showed us earlier. So Sisterless gives a face to the meaning of these various paternalist structures that actually so many women can relate to in Russia, but also beyond. Yeah, and yeah, it's also the voice of her mother that is coupled. So there's a kind of transgenerational perspective through her addition to understanding the story as well. So I wonder, yeah, related to witnessing and the position in which you place your viewer. I wonder, why was it so important for Albina to tell her story? And what was this encounter of witnessing? If you agree with framing like this in the film about For Her, and maybe if you'd like to add to it, like also explaining your own position. So how was that different for you as a creator?
Thank you, Margaret. I think that first battle is a battle over words and a battle over signifiers. So it's good, yeah, to start with a word, witness. And indeed, I think I cannot fully relate to this word, because usually we deal with witnesses in kind of forensic settings where there is some clear situation to which a person bears witness, and also witnessing is, in my at least understanding, deals with observing but not engaging, and observing something very concrete in a way. And in the context of spectator as a witness, I think it's an interesting question, because we when we watch a film, we watch it from our own perspective. So it's of course always witnessing not only of what we see, but also of what we find in ourselves when we see. So it's a very imaginary structure in a way. It's very hard to deal with it in the legal kind of terms. So I would and I also speak about it a little bit, that this I guess that's the difference for me between psychoanalytic position of listening, of dispersed listening, and the witness, and observer, so that I'm more connected to the observer. So I more associate, at least myself, and place from where I'm making the work, and yeah, with a psychoanalytic place where you listen and then you return some things that you heard that are kind of something that would help to make a story also heard by others in a way, so make it more coherent, or as incoherent that it would be to the extent that it becomes coherent in a way. But it's another position in terms of affiliation and activity. And another thing, I think, where I can relate to the term witness, that witness has an affect, but not as experience. And this is what we deal with exactly in the context of kind of war neuroses, and I mean people experiencing, witnessing some difficult situations and then not being able to deal with them psychologically, even though they were not part of it, but they were kind of seeing it without an opportunity to do anything. So there is this kind of it's disempowering position in a way, no? Because it's witnessing that you are locked in this space where you saw something but you couldn't do anything about it. And with a psychoanalytic kind of more psychoanalytic perspective, it's that you listen and then you return your listening in a way. So it's just kind of that's how I see this difference. And I guess it's just more productive to me. I find it more productive to be a listener, or somehow find a relationship to the context I'm working with, rather than being this outsider, like carry this outsider witness position. And for the viewers, I cannot respond. I think it's to me it's interesting to. I mean, I can only share again my experience of people sharing, and I know that those who saw, for example, Sisterless, it was because it's such a personal, intimate space. You enter into someone's psyche, and you're being also exposed not only just the psyche, but to the logics of it. How does it work in a way from the inside? So it's very well received for people who also been through similar things in a way. Or I think I just don't want to make it too heavy, in terms of, because it's quite heavy context that I'm working with, but I don't want to provide any emotional kind of setting where it's very hard to move further. But one of the most dearest response I think that I got, it was from the woman whose sister also committed suicide, and we had a very meaningful experience, meaningful exchange after she watched a film. Yeah. And I also know that in the museum there was someone dealing with alienation in a way, and it was interesting to discover it in the institutional setting also, that how much institutions are equipped of dealing with it now, with people who work here, and then somebody comes and just wants to kind of engage with you emotionally, and it's all about this structures around the works, and that's why this for example, I don't want this film to be online. It's important to have some controlled in a way environment and context. It was shown in some, for example, support groups, and also the groups of psychoanalysts, or like museum, and art settings. So it's but I'm in the constant search, I think, of the settings where this experience can be shared, of witnessing also, that it's not this kind of individual experience, but rather the space where it can be articulated, discussed, and exchanged, and it's not always easy for various reasons.
And to come back to that question about the importance of sharing her story for Albina, I don't know if you would like to respond to that.
I think it comes from both from her personal and kind of social experience of first, forced hospitalizations, where you are denied in the reality that you have, and also it's not only that you're raving and this is it, this is only the beginning. When you start to have the delirium, when you are inside the delirium, it's very important to have someone who takes your delirium seriously. It's not about saying no, you're not raving, or you are raving and you're like being labeled as mad or something, but how can we work with with the delirium that you experience? And that's why again I'm addressing psychoanalytic methodology, because in the experience of psychosis there is a reality that's being kept, but this reality is scattered, and then a person as a reparative gesture tries to gather this reality together. So the delirium that we hear is a delirium that's been kind of consists of this reassembled reality, and this is why I was talking about this fantasies, kind of documentary character fantasies, and why it is important to address it. So it's simply, and when you enter this space where it's so important to be supported when you are in this condition, because it's condition, it's not part of you. It can happen to many people live with psychosis that never unravel in a way. So it's just about specific context, and of course a lot of political context triggers this. So it's it's about, and then she had this, and she talks about it in the film, that the orderlies, the men who were working in the hospital, they sexually abused her, thinking that she's, mad and she won't to remember it, but she did, and this is also something about, how can we address the space where people are denied in their kind of legitimation of what they experience, even those, certain parts of their psyche needs, support. So it's. So it was filmmaking, like making this film was a place where she can, share this, and as it is, without being, because we also met in a reading group. We met in a reading group, so we've been about she's analysis, and she kind of. I cannot say that she just trusted me or something, because the film itself was kind of, we just started to have a conversation and had these recordings, and then the idea of the film kind of came out as a way of working on these topics together, and film as a mode of research, And of course, sorry, but because in the middle of our work, her sister committed suicide, and I said that maybe we stop and we don't make a film, but she said that it's our conversations kind of has changed, because she said now it's very important for her to analyze what happened to her sister and why it happened to her, and how we can bear testimony to it. So it's also about her significant other, and not only about herself. So at the end, kind of this film, it's also a film about her sister, and it's hard to speak about it, not to go into this kind of emotional.
So when talking about the structures of pathology and sickness, for me, and I want to offer a new concept here for us. You are also talking about ghosts. Ghosts in the meaning of unresolved and unsettled pasts, from which such past establish connections with people in this world, in order to be acknowledged and in order to find peace. So there's a whole discourse around ghosts and haunting, and I can suggest you some references later if you're interested. But the idea is that these histories of mass violence do not stay in the past, but they tend to trouble, haunt, disrupt the present. And some theorists like Jacques Derrida or Alexander Etkind have even argued that we have a debt to pay to the past. So if when one of the scenes Albina talks about redeeming herself, it somehow, there's something close to that in what she expresses. And taking this even further, the cultural theorist Adi Kunzmann has asked, in case we move, do the ghosts move with us? And I think your and Albina, so the narrative you've created, make it clear that yes, they do. But sometimes with moving, also new ghosts might be activated and added. And there's this, so to connect it a little bit to your method, this thinking, there's, I think, this very interesting method that you use as a filmmaker of disconnecting images from voice. So there are few moments in this film, Sisterless in particular, where they match. And I think it also comes with creating a kind of intensity. because we need, as viewers, we really need to be alert to follow where the voice is taking the story, and something about this image and voice together, I think, triggers that. Let me see. So how did you choose this way of telling and this way of working with material?
I think I didn't choose. It chose me. I mean, that's kind of, it's about this finding, and that's what I've been speaking about singularity of the work method, and depending on the material that you have and that you deal with, and it's also, even with this film, it's not that I chose Albina to be my protagonist of my film. So it's also just, you know, we were in this reading group, and then she disappeared, and I was just worried where she is, and then I found, and before, so I didn't know all these kind of things about her past in a way before we started making this film. So it's and the same with the film and with its form. I think in general, I'm talking about listening, and as a part of this feminization of production, in the similar manner, sound is the film started with a sound, because it started with our conversations, and they were recorded, you know, on the phone. They were recorded on the computer sound, so it wasn't like a material was prepared to the film, and it's been 20 hours of audio, very dense audio with a lot of kind of articulation and reflection of the brilliant level in a way of how and what had happened, you know, from the history of a family. So I would say that the film is more even governed with what didn't go there, you know. So it's kind of this decision. So for example, yes, I say, and I mean, Albina is like a Tatar, to come back, like she's Tatar, but there is nothing about Tatars, you know, in this film. So it's, I mean, as a positive space. So it's kind of more built around this logics of negativity, but of course, what we see and the result of what she's saying is informed by, for example, you know, her family, her sister that was born in Uzbekistan, and then after the dissolution of Soviet Union, they had to move to Siberia, to the small oil city, in order to find, you know, their ends meet. And this is where Albina was born. And then, I mean, all these displacement histories to say. And in general, the sonic space of the film is very important. And I owe also here Jordan Sand. I don't know if she's here, but someone whom we also met during this PhD program. She's doing PhD in music, and when she saw one of the early versions of the film, she said that she really wants to work with it, and how can we work with it sonically so it would be true to the film. So there is a lot of, I mean, all the sounds that you hear in the film, they belong to the images and to the archives. There are no sounds have been brought from the outside. So, for example, when we see the archival footage, it's you know, the pieces being reconstructed. You know, it's been reconstructed from the very small part that can be taken into work. It was important, kind of, not to follow this you know, professional filmmaking setting where you like add Foley sounds, you know, to adjust at certain places. The edit has been governed by what is there and what can be used in a way. So it's like what parts can be used both from the visual image but also audio, because the first thing that has been done was a script that was based on this audio conversations, and only after that and it was done together with Albina, and then we went to Russia and to film. But to film without, again, because it's kind of a small-scale production, there are beautiful things about doing it in the context of artistic research, but it's also very hard to make a feature film, you know, with the money that artistic research provides, and also with me being outside, like having a Russian passport, so I cannot. I just got now my residency, but before I couldn't apply for grants here, so it was actually quite different from situation of other fellows who have European passports and who could apply for additional funding. So it's been, so we didn't have, like the equipment, for example, to film, to record the soundscape. So it's a lot of kind of effort and love that's been put into the post-production of it to reconstruct and to keep the ecology in a way of the project there. So it's a lot of this conceptual things, a lot of discussions, and a lot of discussions exactly around what does it mean to disembody female voice from the female body, and what about these moments where they're meeting.
And this intensity, which starts right from the beginning of the film. Was that something you aimed for, or was this kind of also a byproduct of such a heavy story with which you've been dealing with?
I think it comes from, again, listening to Albina and her narrative, and it's very intense. I mean, I don't know, it's like 15th edit, of the final. I don't know how many edits there have been before, but they've been much more intense edits actually. So this is like the most with the breathing spaces, and yet it's so this intensity. I think it's a relational thing, I was just, of course, trying to kind of navigate between staying true to her subjectivity and the way of narration, and kind of trying to. I mean, my main kind of goal was to share the logics of how psyche can be affected by certain familial and political context, So it's about a practice of politics. It's about a practice of being part of the family. If about practice of being a woman it's not about it's exactly this fantasy from below. If like to oppose this idea of fantasy from above, and in this it's also again to me like this feminist. It's a feminist gesture.
So in relation to feminism and politics, or feminizing the production, I think, as you put it, I wanted to ask further. So this struggle with the oppressive and paternalist structures of Russian society is very present in the narrative through Albina's stories. And it concerns different instances, structures of care, structures of religion, the paternalist patriarchal public opinion, but sometimes also her mother's ideas that she resists and opposes. So her resistance seems to have a relationship with your idea also of this feminization. And I was wondering if you can articulate it further. How does it look like in practice? And what could its tools and agendas be further, if you can imagine somehow?
It's imagining is hard for me because I try not to imagine. I try to take every situation, as a given in a way, and then starting to also artistic situation and cinematic situation, because as I said that I don't I don't sit and think, okay, what I will do next. It's more that there is a certain temporality, there is a certain availability of, material availability, or some kind of somebody reaching to me, like some relationship in a way, and then finding myself in this situation, I start, building something and sharing something to say. So, as I said, that, but I want to reinforce, I think, the statement about feminization of productions, that it's not about having a certain set of rules of, this is how, like the feminist production of the artistic work or, cinematic work would look like, but rather how can we create a space in which every work situation would be perceived singularly, will be kind of reaching beyond, the capitalist logics of labor division, would be in the constant process of deconstruction, but at the same time being open to something that happens on the way. So all the things that happens on the way, at the end, is something that constitutes work. In my case, so it's of course there is a certain kind of intention, maybe small intention, but it never ends, in the place where it starts. So it's very different, I think, from like, okay, I will do the work about this or that, and that's why again I call myself documentary artist, because it's at the end what I have, the output is a document of a certain kind. It's a document of a certain time, of a certain context, of a certain kind of political reality. So, but there is an activist task, I would say, that in this thinking and thinking together about feminization of production, and it's exactly in the world where most institutions are, masculine and driven by kind of this meta ideas about, about politics, about. How certain social structures should look like, how can we break them and speak and act not in the logics of these grand narratives, but in the logics that come, from below, and that it's. I think everyone, and I guess everyone here, is affiliated to a big institution, and there is always a certain. Negotiation, that and stamina that requires to be in it to be able to act, and within the structures that are there, but at the same time they're very formal, that they sometimes they don't work, or they're not, they're not in use, or they are inaccessible. So it's all this kind of. To me, it's the feminization of productions also about this constant ruptures, constant also vulnerabilities, because you're exposing yourself, and by exposing yourself, you expose something in the discourse around you, something that doesn't work in this discourse, and something that where you can, on the ground of which you can connect with other people who actually might also relate to it, but just wouldn't do it by alone, or so it's kind of this. It's a collective task in a way. So, and in this case again, I've been engaged in this kind of collective attempts in several forms. So it's like from having a space, where we would give keys to anyone who wanted to have the keys from it, and then it's also about having about apropos responsibility, that something that could work but also could not work, because at the end, that people would do something. I mean, it's a test of reality. So of course I'm working within certain context, but I'm also constantly working in this interlayer between contexts in a way, exactly, that is accessible through language, is accessible through just exposition of the images, it is accessible through it's like also there is another Freudian text where he speaks about this artist, like how to recognize camps. No, unfortunately I forgot the name of the art historian who wrote how to recognize that it's Rossetti or not, that we have to look at hands, that on the painting, not at the face, but at hands. So something which is usually we don't pay attention to it. So it's something that goes secondary, but actually the kind of this is the science, kind of this secondary science through which we can get some kind of truth about or context about what we're dealing with. I mean, this is just a situation, the example from art history, but it goes with the same. With, I mean, he kind of draws an analogy to the speech of the analysand and how we have to listen not to the narrative that's been kind of served to us as a narrative, but like this kind of small things that a person might not think of. So it's the same with the institution, it's the same with the film production, it's the same. I mean, this is a methodology that I'm working with, basically, to kind of decentralize my attention from the main struggle and return kind of the repressed of the main struggle through this kind of small science, and this requires this exercise of dispersed listening. So and I think it's also easier to connect to people in a way, because when you present to them like a kind of a problem, whether it's like an ecological or psychic or gender struggle. I mean, it's from kind of this big plane. It's very hard for people to relate. But then, if you present it through this kind of on the micro scale, it's easier to connect. Also through the logics of negativity, that I don't connect to it, but I connect to that. So it's something like this. I don't know if it was clear.
Yeah, thank you. So let's open this up with the time that we have left, because I'm sure there's more questions from the audience as well.
And I also wanted to ask, because here, thank you, Margaret. And there's also my main supervisor, Florian Schneider. Florian, if you want to say something or contribute.
Yeah, I actually have one question. Super, perfect. No, thank you very much. I would have one question. I might also, in advance, apologize. I mean, I will have to leave in something like 15 minutes because I have to run the General Assembly of the society. I would have one question, because I think your format of presentation through this kind of vocabulary or glossary that introduces the terms that appeared as particularly important over this period of research. I'm particularly convinced or attracted or fascinated by the term overwriting, because I think in its multiple meanings, we tend to almost in each discourse in which we use the word overwriting. I know it from code development, I know it from neuroscience, I know it from rhetorics and so on. In every context it has a totally different meaning, which opens up, I think, a very interesting multiplicity. I think when we use the term overwriting, it can mean interference, it can mean verbosity, or writing too much or too much of writing. I'm particularly interested in this process of overwriting as a kind of superimposition of texts on top of each others, which is which happens always with a certain level of opacity. So it might be that residues or parts of the underlying layer still shine through, and I think that this is a particularly convincing and very, very interesting method that you have developed. Since I have the privilege to have followed your work from the very beginning, so I think it's really very, very impressive how you develop to, how you start to develop a language, but not so much in the, not parole, but langue. No? I mean,
also
really
la langue.
The capacity to speak about something that otherwise is extremely difficult to address or to speak, or even to speak out. Yeah? And so my question actually would be, since this is not a public defense of a final product, yeah, since you make this very, very strong claims that this is about filmmaking as a process and not as a product. Yeah. What do you think? How are you going to develop this further, and in which direction towards a kind of, let's call it preliminary end of the research period that is called PhD. I mean, of course, it will go on afterwards or beyond it.
Thank you, Florian. First, I think that I want to note that when I was speaking about this process-oriented, I also noticed that it's not about the orientation of it's not about that process is more important than the result, because the result is also part of the process, how I perceive it. So it's not something that compete. But indeed, I can only answer your question from perspective of now time, and where I think it would go now. And now, also because I became a mother, and I think there is, and also because when I entered this PhD program, I intended to work with childhood and adolescence, also as a political concept in relation to the state, because another archive, I have multiple archives, and another archive that I came to the program with was the archive from the orphanage in St. Petersburg, where I was volunteering and working with a child with also psychiatric diagnosis, and I wanted to make so there is this camering that's been involved in our time spent together, but I didn't want to deal with it until he turns 18, and he's turning 18, so it was when we met he was 11, so I waited for this time for this, and another temporality that I think will be very interesting to deal with and to address is childhood, and how can we address all these questions of coloniality and state and sexuality and class through perspective of childhood. And if you also said about language, and I immediately think about another psychoanalytic concept, la langue, and la langue is it's a Lacanian concept where he speaks about language which is not about meaning but about enjoyment. So in practice it would be, the lullaby that your mother, sang to you, but you don't remember it. But then every time you hear something close to it, you have a very, kind of, you start to experience a lot of affect. So it's libidinally invested linguistic spaces or parts of language or ways of using the words. And this is of course connected to my relationship with Tatar, because I understand, but I don't really speak, and it's a very important space to me, as a listener. So it's all this, and of course it's connected to the idea of the beginning of the human subjectivity, which is of course multiple, and working with Dalto, I think, and with my experience to come, because again I don't want to separate what I'm living through from what I'm doing, and it won't be there directly, but it will be kind of somehow, I guess, mixed together. And also the other thing that I want to work also more discursively and thinking about creating also a certain maybe I mean it's I have a little notebook with a lot of ideas and thoughts, but then it's okay. What is like economic situation, you know, and like what can I do now? What is possible to do right now? Basically, that's kind of the question. And let's see where I'll be after my maternity leave.
I have a question and a comment. It's a little bit mixed for me now. I will start with it was a documentary about Helmstedt, a Finnish person that traveled to Mongolia the beginning of the 20th century, and then they made a lot of documentaries, but then in one of the documentary or one of the film about the documentaries, there was a scene that was a person catching a sheep and making with the knife cutting the breast and putting the hand inside and making the heart stop, because this tribe should not kill an animal. So, but then they could stop the heart. And that was very, very, very strong. And because of that scene, I began to research Helmstedt and his life, and against Russian and occupations and things like this. But the other is, it was an interview with Luis Moreno Campo. He's a public prosecutor, and he was asked about films and political situations. And then he said that films are very important to create concepts, paradigms that you cannot do other way. For instance, he says that Holocausto was not a term that was created in the jury of Nuremberg, but was created in films, in 2 films, 10 years after. But in the beginning, you reject witnessing. And you said that witnessing would not be engaged with. But then you use the word testimony. So what's the difference for you between witnessing and testimony? Because for me, both terms are related.
Thank you, and a very interesting comment. But I think that it's not about the term itself, but also the relation of this term with other terms and contexts. And I just use this word in that context. But yeah, as you know, it's like when you use a name, when you name something, and then when you use it not as a name, but just, I mean, it's when I said testimonies, I didn't address testimonies as a term, you know, that a term and vocabulary that I work with. It was just one of the words in the row of words to say. And with witnessing, I guess I just said to Margaret that I would not rather isolate it as a term with which, because I don't find it productive to continue to work within the strand of this term, that there are other terms and words which I think are more kind of suit more to what I do, but it doesn't mean that somebody else, you know, cannot use it in relation even to what I do, because it's all about, you know, situating the word in certain context. So it's just I explained how I perceive witnessing and why I more kind of use this kind of listening, dispersed listening setup. I don't know if I answered your question, but
yes. Thank you, Jana, and also thank you, Margaret. Maybe I want to clarify something here first, especially around your remark, Margaret, because I think this idea of, or the concept of witness becomes rather pivotal here in your practice. And I will explain how I see this, actually. And also more thinking on, let's say, the the opposite figure of witness that you distinguish between observer and witness. I see that idea of the witness, for me, as I see it in your work, it revolves around an ontological verification. And that means actually that, okay, where you basically can distinguish, and this is my abusement of the terms, between the sane and the mad. As long as you have a witness, you can actually verify what sort of happened. And then I bring this back to your practice and to your title, Beyond the Reality Principle. So this transformation of an observer towards a witness is for me a sort of the reality principle in your work. And then here's my question actually. So if you don't have to agree with me here, but if that would be the case, what would it actually mean then if you go beyond that reality principle? And how would it actually manifest in your work? If you understand what I mean. I hope so.
Do you want to say anything, Margaret? If you have any comment on that first.
Well, to situate in the film theory for me is like more demanding, but maybe just to add to this notion of witnessing, for me it's also related to an agency, because if we witness as viewers something so close by, and it makes us realize something that we were not encountered with previously, then this gives also, you know, a kind of responsibility, agency. It gives like a kind of a ground from which to act, and maybe act differently compared to, you know, we might have without having been a witness to these conversations and this narrative that you are creating in your film.
I think I understand what you mean by this idea of ontological verification, and this indeed, but this is more because I think we have a little misunderstanding in a way in this discussion around gazes, and you know who is kind of standing on the other side of the gaze, and there is myself as a filmmaker, there is Albina, and with her exactly, you know, need in this ontological verification, who is not necessarily me, you know, because, you know, when someone is building a relationship with a camera, it's not the relationship with the director, but the relationship with the camera, so it kind of has this potentiality of others to come there. So it's different from your immediate experience, you know, of witnessing or observing something. So it's, and then of course there is a spectator who is watching, but we also don't know what exactly, you know, they're watching and how and from what perspective they're observing something. So it's not that something that I, as a director, organizer of a certain context, can control or have a desire to control. In a way, it's more that what to me is this. Claim beyond the reality principle mean that I really want to create a context in which there will be a certain kind of manipulation would not be possible in a way, no, and that we speak so much about kind of expanding our places, you know, of production or of dealing with the other, but to me it's also actually about being more strict in terms of bordering them, and this is what I'm speaking about. This what I'm opposing to this concept of boundless borders, which in reality creates this schizophrenic situation where you cannot relate to anything, because this idea of land, you know, it's completely, and you know, space and ground, it completely was taken out, where you kind of can relate to everything and nothing. So and this is to me where I, in my understanding, you know, positions this word witness, you know. So it's just it's a very disembodied term in a way for me. But it doesn't mean that in someone else's theory it would not have this embodied. And in this beyond the reality principle, it's exactly how can I make the works in which a certain constraint also will be introduced, you know, in terms of this, you know, fantasies and realities that may help to build kind of a more materialist discussion about questions that are, to me, are very materialist, but not addressed materially in a way. I remember actually once when, because Martinus, just to everyone else, he's my colleague, and I remember reading very early on your text where you addressed the pixie dust as immaterial, like as something non-existent, and I remember that I was thinking that, but the dust is a labor of pixies, so it also can be addressed materially, you know. So to me, this is kind of the ground on which theoretical, you know, and also activist ground on which I'm standing. That everything can be, and there are some things that, you know, that are part of our, you know, the production, symbolic production of our realities, that has to be addressed materialistically. Even those they can seemingly be, you know, kind of unserious, or I don't know, like like ghostly. I mean, all this kind of, or it's an effect, you know, all these things, and it's definitely possible to analyze these things, you know, from the perspective of the psyche and through the apparatuses that's been proposed, for example, with psychoanalysis, to me.
I think there's also maybe different kinds of witnessing, that there's in a way your witnessing of Albina and some of her family members, and then there's the viewers witnessing. So in a way we are witnesses to your witnessing.
You consider yourself a witness to?
I mean, yeah, I think this is also what I mean with this transformation of an observer to a witness, right? It is actually participating in a testimony almost of someone, right? Where you become an active, where you perform an active role through empathy, sympathy, whatever. So I think it's super relevant, this concept, or not even concept, but this point of view of a witness in your work, as I see it, look at it now. Yeah.
I think that there is one more thing that I can maybe add, is that because when the edit was done, Albina was alive, no, and this film was also conceived as a support structure to her. So at the end of the film, there was an intertitle that said that, and it was inspired also by like early Soviet documentaries actually for children, like Arsha Vanesva, for example, when in the end they write like, dear children, what did you like, what you did not like, you know, please send your opinions to this address, blah blah blah. So it was her email there at the end, that if you want to support, so it was like, you know, whenever anywhere in the world somebody would watch a film, there is an opportunity to write to Albina directly. And that was kind of the idea, and she really liked it also. So there would be, you know, once in a while this letter, in a way, coming from her, exactly of this some witness who bears a part of her testimony. But of course, after she committed suicide, I removed it, and with another element of reality that. Her delirium that we saw in the film came back because of the political context, the new political context that she couldn't found herself in, and thus decided to end this story this way. So I think you're right in the sense that there is something from where it started, but then there is also this.
And now I was thinking about witnessing over writing and what you said about psychosis reassembling. And then it has to do with our incapacity to deal with reality. So we are always overwriting.
I mean, reality is not something, it's not exactly, that's why I use this principle to highlight that it's not about kind of objective, neutral reality that we have unproblematic access. It's a reality that is decentralized, that's a reality that we have access through our position, very subjective position, through our language. I mean, a lot of mediation in a way. So it's more an ethical perspective rather than kind of again positive space, because it's about our relationship to reality and how can we deal with the certain things that happen, and without repressing them or not dealing with them, but how can we create a space where we can address them as they are, even though it might be beyond representation, as with this example of the chest being torn, that it's something beyond. And I mean, to me, for example, breastfeeding also became such a thing that it's something that I wouldn't imagine before I experienced it in a way. So it's it's many things can act in this capacity. And I mean, Lacan introduces this concept of the real to speak about it. So something that stays beyond symbolization, that is that we cannot have an access through our consciousness, but rather that something that keeps on kind of returning, and something that cannot be resolved for once. Something that it's usually questions of life, of death, of love, things that we have constantly to reintroduce and reconstruct. And in this sense, witnessing here is also kind of something takes another form. That it's not something that happened, but something that never can happen, to the end. Something that's constantly revolving. And I mean, hopefully, my work is somehow the capsule of such a,
Are there any more questions? One last question?
Thank you. I didn't see your work yet, but from what you were talking about psychosis and Tatar language, made me remember this French film from last year. I don't know if you watched it, Saint-Omer by Alice Diop, about a Senegalese woman who commits a crime in France. And it's about a woman whose mother actually prohibited speaking Wolof, only French. And when she comes to France, she articulates very well in French, but she cannot write very well in French, even though she wants to make a PhD on Ludwig Wittgenstein, and her French supervisor almost mocks her for choosing Occidental philosopher and not someone close to her culture. And I also study how prohibition of Ukrainian language influenced the formation of identity. So I was wondering, for example, in this end credits that you had to delete, did Albina wrote it in Russian or in Tatar, and how, in your mind, this prohibition of Tatar language influenced the identity and maybe caused psychosis or not? Because, of course, these things are very connected, and I'm really interested also in the question of psychosis, because, taking out your native language, of course, and then, there's a lot, of course, to speak about in this geopolitical context, but since it's the last question, just this question.
Thank you. First, very practical response that Albina didn't speak Tatar at all because of their history, of their family, of the displacement. And I mean, there are a lot of the same as there are a lot of Ukrainians who don't speak Ukrainian. I mean, it's like it's a common thing actually on a post-Soviet context that you. Because the language, especially within the ethnic republics in Russia, that the linguistic question is totally kind of left to your family. So if your family makes this tremendous efforts, in speaking to you, then you speak the language. If not, you're not, you don't, or even if they want to you, but maybe the class context doesn't allow. I don't know, like spend a lot of time with your children or something. So Albina didn't speak Tatar, but of course, I mean, we deal with this residual character of their names, of their surnames, of the places where they are from, and I'm actually, there is this booklet that Margaret is holding in her hand, and there is a text by myself, and I speak there about Frantz Fanon, and in relation to his research as this kind of also bearer of a double identity is in another colonial context, and because he's been working now as a psychiatrist in Algeria, and then he in his book, Wretched of the in Black Skin, White Masks, in this book he's writing that how the experience of psychosis is akin to the how it is connected to people not finding themselves. I mean, how many people there are from the hospital actually, who didn't speak, who couldn't have the access to this language, or to French, who couldn't identify themselves fully as French, and how the racialized subjects basically experienced it. Experience this political context as a psychotic decomposition. So how can we link this to? I'm a little bit already overloaded with different contexts, but it's definitely of the connection, and this is kind of one of the main points that I make in terms of colonial madness. Why it is important to kind of perceive this. Also on the level of the subject, because through subjects we can see how coloniality is practiced, not how it's just been introduced as a state concept or kind of propaganda, but actually what are the real results and effects on the psyches. And Florian is not here any longer, but this is, it's another work that I'm working on I started to work on, but it might take some time because it's also about the search that I'm looking for a Tatar psychiatrist. I want just to have a work where I'm interviewing her or him, because the language of psychiatry, of course, in Russia and the Soviet Union was Russian. But there are a lot of people, who didn't speak Russian still. So how would a psychiatrist work, with a subject who doesn't speak Russian in terms of, kind of medical context? So I would be just interested to bring this experience and to life. But it would just, I just want someone who worked both in Soviet context and in Russian context. So it's not. It will take some time to find, but usually in my previous work I was also looking for women called Siumbike, and I found 6 of them, even though it also was hard to imagine that it would be possible. But then when you exactly start, then it kind of somehow works. I don't know if I answered your question, but we can speak also after words, but I think this work in the Volga-Ural sky is kind of one of the kind of formal ways to try to respond to this question of language, and language that doesn't belong to you fully, but which is part of you, and part of you not on the level of meaning, but on the kind of aesthetical and ethical level. And there are some screening copies of some books in the next to the TV screen, and there is this dictionary that I did with my partner and collaborator about the affectionate dictionary of Tatar. So there are a lot of that's where I'm exploring on the example of Tatar, not on a theoretical level, but more on a practical level, to the language to which I affiliate, through certain expressions and ways, the language work, and how does this idea kind of find itself? Because of course it's very different from Russian. And yes, some kind of verbs, all these kind of things that peculiar to the language and how they influence the thinking on the formal level, basically.
I think we have to stop here.
But thank you everyone who stayed through.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marianne, because Marianne is a curator of the exhibition, and thank you so much for being,
of course,
in many capacities.
I'm the one who is saying thank you.
And
I'm very happy also to show the film Sisterless in 15 minutes. We're just gonna throw you out of here and then reorganize the space, so it's possible to actually see the film now in 15 minutes. Okay, thank you.